Hello, I'm Karen Allen from the Women at the Well Bible Study here at Greendale People's Church. Today I will be reading from the book of Acts, chapter 17, verse 16, through chapter 18, verse 23, from the Message. If you're following the Life Change Study Guide we are using, we're on Lesson 14. In today's reading, we find Paul in Athens, where he finds a real opportunity for his teaching. He talks with several new groups of people. One of those is the Epicureans, who follow Epicurus, who lived from 341 to 270 BC. His followers believed that everything is made of atoms, and when one dies, you just disintegrate, and those atoms are recycled to make other things. Hence, there's no need to fear death, and there's no punishment after death. Secondly, they feel that God lives in between the worlds, in a blessed place, but they have no concern for people or worldly manners, so therefore there was no need to fear God or to pray to them. And lastly, the highest good for a person is their pleasure or peace of mind, without disturbing thoughts or cares. Pleasures of the flesh are to be minimized because usually they felt that those would end up causing pain. He also spoke with the Stoics. The Stoics were taught by Zeno, who lived from 334 to 263 BC. They were called Stoic because Zeno taught in a stoa, or a covered porch. And their beliefs were as follows. Man is part of nature, and just a logo or reason imposes order on the matter. So it will govern one's life. One is to live in harmony with nature and seek to cooperate with and submit to destiny. They also believe that self-sufficiency is the highest human virtue, tolerating and enduring life as much as possible. But they also believed that if it became overwhelming, one could commit suicide with dignity. They also felt that God was not a person, but instead it was a soul of the universe and appeared in everything. The soul survived when one died, but instead of keeping the individual personality, it would be joining into the world soul. These are a couple of tough theologies to follow. Take a moment to consider the differences with Christianity that Paul was teaching at the time. To follow Jesus was a much brighter path for many. Now on to the readings. The longer Paul waited in Athens for Silas and Timothy, the angrier he got. All those idols! The city was a junkyard of idols. He discussed it with the Jews and other like-minded people at their meeting place. And every day he went out into the streets and talked with anyone who happened along. He got to know some of the Epicurean and Stoic intellectuals pretty well during these conversations. Some of them dismissed him with sarcasm. What a moron! But others listening to him go on about Jesus and the resurrection were intrigued. That's a new slant on the gods. Tell us more. These people got together and asked him to make a public presentation over at the Areopagus, where things were a little quieter. They said, "This is new for us. We've never heard anything quite like it. Where did you come up with this anyway? Explain it so we can understand." Downtown Athens was a great place for gossip. There were always people hanging around, natives and tourists, waiting for the latest tidbit on almost anything. So Paul took his stand in the open space at the Areopagus and laid it out for them. It is plain to see that you Athenians take your religion seriously. When I arrived here the other day, I was fascinated with all the shrines I came across. And then I found one inscribed, "To the God nobody knows." I am here to introduce you to this God so you can worship intelligently, know who you are dealing with. the God who made the world and everything in it. This master of sky and land doesn't live in custom-made shrines or need the human race to run errands for him as if he couldn't take care of himself. He makes the creatures. The creatures don't make him. Starting from scratch, he made the entire human race and made the earth hospitable with plenty of time and space for living so we could seek after God and not grope around in the dark, but actually find him. He doesn't play hide and seek with us. He's not remote. He's near. We live and move in him. Can't get away from him. One of your poets said it well. We're God created. Well, if we are God created, it doesn't make a lot of sense to think we could hire a sculptor to chisel a God out of stone for us, does it? God overlooks it as long as you don't know any better. But this time is past. The unknown is now known. And he's calling for a radical life change. He has set a day when the entire human race will be judged and everything set right. He has already appointed the judge, confirming him before everyone by raising him from the dead. At the phrase, raising him from the dead, the listeners split. Some laughed at him and walked off making jokes. Others said, "Let's do this again. We want to hear more." But that was it for the day, and Paul left. There were still others, it turned out, who were convinced then and there and stuck with Paul, among them Dionysius the Areopagite and a woman named Damaris. Now on to chapter 18. After Athens, Paul went to Corinth. That is where he discovered Aquila, a Jew born in Pontus, and his wife Priscilla. They had just arrived from Italy, part of the general expulsion of Jews from Rome ordered by Claudius. Paul moved in with them, and they worked together at their common trade of tent making. But every Sabbath he was at the meeting place doing his best to convince both Jews and Greeks about Jesus. When Silas and Timothy arrived from Macedonia, Paul was able to give all of his time to preaching and teaching, doing everything he could to persuade the Jews that Jesus was in fact God's Messiah. But no such luck. All they did was argue contemptuously and contradict him at every turn. Totally exasperated, Paul had finally had it with them and gave it up as a bad job. "Have it your way then," he said. "You've made your bed, now lie in it. From now on, I'm spending my time with the other nations." He walked out and went to the home of Titius Justus, a God-fearing man who lived right next to the Jews' meeting place. But Paul's efforts with the Jews wasn't a lost cause for Crispus, the meeting place president. He put his trust in the master. In fact, his entire family believed with him. In the course of listening to Paul, a great many Corinthians believed and were baptized. One night, the master spoke to Paul in a dream. "Keep it up and don't let anyone intimidate or silence you. No matter what happens, I'm with you, and no one is going to be able to hurt you. You have no idea how many people I have on my side in this city." That was all he needed to do to stick it out. He stayed another year and a half, faithfully teaching the word of God to the Corinthians. When Gallio was governor of Achaia province, the Jews got up a campaign against Paul, hauled him into court, and filed charges. "This man is seducing people into acts of worship that are illegal." Just as Paul was about to defend himself, Gallio interrupted and said to the Jews, "If this was a matter of criminal conduct, I would gladly hear you out. But it sounds to me like one of more Jewish squabble, another of your endless hair-splitting quarrels over religion. Take care of it on your own time. I can't be bothered with this nonsense." and he cleared them out of the courthouse. Now the street rabble turned on Sosthenes, the new meeting place president, and beat him up in plain sight of the court. Gallio didn't raise a finger. He could not care less. Paul stayed a little longer in Corinth, but then it was time to take leave of his friends. Saying his goodbyes, he sailed for Syria, Priscilla and Aquila with him. Before boarding the ship in the harbor town of Caesarea, he had his head shaved as part of a vow he had taken. They landed in Ephesus when Priscilla and Aquila got off and stayed. Paul left the ship briefly to go to the meeting place and preach to the Jews. They wanted him to stay longer, but he said he couldn't. After saying his goodbyes, he promised, "I'll be back, God willing." From Ephesus, he sailed to Caesarea. He greeted the church there and then went to Antioch, completing the journey. After spending a considerable time with the Antioch Christians, Paul set off again for Galatia and Phrygia, retracing his old tracks, one town after another, putting fresh heart into the disciples. That is the end of the reading for this week. In Athens, Paul was asked to speak publicly at Areopagus. Literally in Greek, this is the hill of Ares, the god of war. This was a place of prestige, continuing to exercise responsibility in religion, morals, and homicide during Paul's time. Now for the questions about our readings. How was Paul able to be assertive and speak so well to the cultured Athenians? You may get a clue to an answer for this by reading 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 18 through 31. You might find some help there. Next, why did he address the Athenians differently than the Jews? What principle of evangelism did he use? In the reading of chapter 17, did you find anything that was relevant for your life now, and why? Aquila and Priscilla were secular officials, and they were trained as Paul's disciples. Does God still use secular officials to further the gospel? Has God ever made any promises to you similar to the one in Paul's dream in chapter 18, verses 9 and 10? Has it been faithful? How should you act in light of that promise? How is what we have read in chapter 18 so far relevant in your life? What prayer and/or action will be part of your attempt to grow in this area by God's grace? Continue to note the themes on the 6 themes that we find in Acts that we started in the beginning of this study. If you have any questions or you want to discuss the answers to the questions I've posed today, please contact me by email at karenallen2006@aol.com. And thank you for joining us today. Many blessings to you and yours.